G'day everyone, welcome back to Luke's Way of Looking. Got another tutorial for you today. In this video we're going to be looking at the cube polygon primitive, and we will be making another 3D printable object. So let's get into it. Alrighty, so the first thing we're going to want to do is make our way up to the top shelf here. Click the cube to create a cube. I'm also going to turn on anti-aliasing, and let's zoom in a bit. I'm also going to turn off the grid. Won't really need it for this one. So our goal for this tutorial is to make a simple wooden storage crate that we can use as terrain. So I think our first step here is going to be click on the cube, hold right click and drag to face selection mode. And we're going to click and drag using the marquee tool to select all the faces on the cube. Next, we're going to hit Control E or the extrude tool up in the toolbar, which will bring up our extrude tool controls. Now, what you're going to notice is that if I simply drag on the controls, all it's going to do is extrude the entire cube out. However, this isn't really what we want. I'm going to go back to not touching anything, and you'll see that when you use the extrusion tool, there's this little window that pops up. All of these values do different things, but today we want the one that says keep faces together on, and we want to turn that off. So we want keep faces together off, and to do that you can just click and drag in the little text box there. So now what you'll notice is when I use extrude tool, it will extrude all the faces away from the cube relative to their normals. And this is getting a bit closer to what we want. And the next thing we want to do before we extrude anything is tap R on the keyboard, which we know goes to our scale tool. Now, we're still not ready for our extrusion process. We're going to be learning a new tool, or a new set of controls for a tool, I should say. So while holding down R or any of the other transformation tools, you can do this with rotation and move tool as well. So we hold down R, and then we hold down left click on the object. It's going to bring up a menu wheel. This menu allows you to determine certain constraints of the tool that you're using. This allows us to choose the behavior of the scale tool, or the move tool, or the rotate tool. Now currently the behavior is set to the object, and this means that the scale tool will scale the object based on what the object's orientation is and the object's center pivot. If we select world, we're not going to notice much difference because currently the object hasn't been rotated. So if we're scaling it relative to the world axis, it's going to be the same as scaling it relative to the object axis. Now, I'm just going to interrupt the video here to discuss a little bit more about the tool constraints and give you an example so that you can visualize what's going on. So currently we have our cube, and if we, for instance, have our move tool set to object, so hold W, hold left click on the object, and then select the object constraint, you'll see that currently the axis for the move tool matches the axis, the world axis. In fact, it might be easier if I turn the grid on for this too. Now, if I hit E to rotate and rotate the cube an amount, you'll notice that the move tool axis stays in line with the rotation that we just did on the cube, because the move tool is set to be constrained by the object. You can see now that the axes on the move tool, when set to object, now don't match down in the bottom here with the world axis. However, if I hold W and left click, select world. Now I'm controlling the object with the move tool using the world axis. So even though I've performed rotations on the cube, I can move it in the normal world axis directions. If I switch it back to object, I can move it in the axes relevant to the rotations we've performed on the object. I hope that makes some sense. Obviously, in this tutorial, we are using the component constraint, which gives you a control axis for the object based on what components you have selected. So if you don't have any components selected, the component constraint won't actually do anything. If I select a face or a couple of faces, go to the component selection mode, we won't actually be moving the object now. We're going to be moving those two faces. Hope that makes sense. Now let's get back to the tutorial. Now what we want is the component selection, which will change the tool to scale based on the components that we have selected. So since we have 6 faces selected, and they have technically all been extruded and not connected together, when we grab our planar scale control and drag inwards, you can see that we are scaling all of these faces simultaneously and uniformly. And this is exactly what we want. I'm going to scale mine to about here. And then we're going to extrude again, and using the extrusion tools, drag inwards a bit. And then we can hit Q to deselect the tool, hold right click and drag up to object mode to view the object. And we've created a cube with some indented faces. In fact, I feel like these faces are indented a little bit too much. So I'm going to right click, drag down to face mode. And if they're not already selected, you can just hold shift, rotate around the cube, select all the faces, go to the move tool, and now holding W and left click, we can set that to component. To bring the faces back out a little bit. Alrighty, now that we're at this point, I'm going to delete our construction history, edit, delete by type, history. The last thing we want to do for this crate is add our cross braces in these indents that we've made. So we're going to prepare for that by first double clicking on our insert edge loop tool, setting it to multiple edge loops and number of edge loops 1. This means that whatever edge we click on, it's going to create one edge loop exactly halfway in between the two vertices that end the edge. So if I click anywhere on this edge, it's just going to put an edge loop in the middle, and that's what we want. I'm going to do one there, and one there. And the reason for this will become evident in a second. I'm going to go back to object mode, and we're going to create a new cube. Now, obviously this cube isn't looking much like a plank of wood at the moment. So we're going to drag it away from our base crate design. We're going to scale it to look a little bit more like a plank of wood. And now we can grab this new plank that we've created, hold V, which is the vertex snap. And now when we drag the object while we're holding V, it's going to try and snap to the vertices on the other object we have here. However, we want to snap it to the center vertex because we've created these edge loops. So now in the center of each of these cutouts, there's a vertex that we can snap this plank to. The other thing I'm going to do is rename my objects in the outlier, which you can just double click to do that. Call this one crate underscore base. Maya doesn't like using spaces, so it's going to put an underscore wherever you use a space. So you can just either use a space and ignore that fact, or you can put the underscore in yourself. And I'm going to call this one crate plank. All right, now we can select our plank and we want to rotate it 45 degrees. So if you remember, we can see our exact transformation values in the channel box editor. I'm going to rotate it roughly 45 and go into the rotate X text box, type in 45, and now I have it rotated exactly 45 degrees. Now, this isn't quite as far back as I would like, and there's also a tiny little gap here down at the bottom. So we can fix that now by going into our scale tool, and we'll set our scale tool to object constraint. So it will scale based on the object's axes, which have changed because we've rotated it, and scale it out a little bit. That gets rid of those gaps. Hit W to select the move tool, and we're going to push it back a little bit. So now we have our little cross brace. Now we could do that process, creating, rotating, and adjusting for every single one of these indents, but I don't really want to do that. So I'm going to show you a quicker and easier way of getting a cross brace onto every one of these indents. Now I don't really want to change the pivot point of this object, and I don't want to edit the rotation values either. So what I'm going to do is just group this object by hitting Control G on the keyboard. And if you look over in our outlier, now we've got a group. If we hit the plus, inside of that group is our plank object. So I'm going to rename this group. And as you can see, this group has no transformation values at all. And because we're working at the center of the grid, the group's pivot point and orientation has defaulted to center of the grid, 0, 0, 0. So now we can Control D, make sure we've got the group selected and not the plank. Control D is duplicate. So now we have a duplicate of the group containing the plank. And then hit E while we've got the group selected. And we can rotate the group 90 degrees exactly by typing it in. And we have kept all of the rotation and movement and adjustment that we did on the previous plank, and simply rotated it 90 degrees by using it inside of a group. You can select this group, and Control D again. And now we just have to switch the values to 180. And now we have our cross brace on 4 sides of the cube. We can go back to our original plank group, Control D to duplicate, and just simply rotate it the other way. Now all 6 sides of our crate have cross braces, and I may just make this a little bit more interesting. I'm going to select the plank that's on the top of our crate here, not the group that it's in. Duplicate just the plank, and then rotate that the other way, 45 degrees, which looks like it's going to want to be 135. And same on the bottom here, just the plank itself, the object, sorry, itself, not the group. And there you go. A very simple crate. Doesn't look too fancy. However, if you printed this out and painted it up, especially in a miniature scale, you could probably get it looking pretty good. So now to export this as a .obj file, we want to go into object mode by right-clicking and dragging to object mode. And then we can marquee select all of our objects in the scene, file, export selection. And we want to, you can save this in any folder that you like. However, in my tutorial project that I've set up, I'll prefer to save it into assets, where our potion bottle is. And there you go. Now you can use that .obj file, take it into your favorite slicing software, scale it to your liking, and print it out. Now, obviously, there are ways that you could improve this design to make it a little bit more interesting. In fact, I decided to go back and add a few little embellishments to the crate design using only the tools and primitives that we've learned about so far. So my challenge to you is to add a few embellishments, such as what I've done here, and see if you can't get your crate looking a little bit spicier. As always, don't forget to save your work. Even though we have exported our object, we want to make sure that we're saving our scene files, setting up our autosaves, that type of thing. All right, so that's it for this tutorial. That's some interesting stuff you can do with the cube. We learned some more tools, and in the next tutorial, I think we will look at the cylinder. So thanks for watching. I hope you found this informative, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.